At Dave Cooper Live, we connect the industry leaders in the architectural, engineering, and construction space with the people, the products, and the processes to help them build it better. Carbon, it's invisible, it's complicated, and nobody asked for a bag of low carbon at the hardware store. But it's quickly becoming one of the biggest risks in construction, and the smartest companies are getting ahead of it. That's exactly what Dr. Shawn Hunter and his team at DuPont Shelter Solutions are doing. They're not waiting for regulation or market mandates. They're proactively managing decarbonization, transforming XPS insulation into low embodied carbon material, and using LCA and EPDs to guide innovation. And despite all the noise in the headlines, climate action in the U.S. is still happening because people like Shawn are proving that collaboration, not competition, is how we'll build the next generation of sustainable structures. So stick around. We're breaking down how DuPont is turning bold sustainability goals into real-world change, one product at a time. But before we get into any of all of this, we got to give some shout outs to our supporting members. Cobalt Creed is servicing builders, developers, prefab home builders, and manufacturers, allowing them to achieve the highest levels of comfort, indoor air quality, and low energy costs with their HVAC systems installed for their projects and their customers. Their approach is simple. By using their proprietary small duct, high velocity central heating and cooling systems. If you want to learn more, go to cobaltcreed.com. And now a few words from these supporting members as well. Brought to you by Greatech, developers of the complete light gauge steel and wood framing software for Revit StruxSoft. Off-site, modular, or prefabricated, StruxSoft Framer turns Revit into a powerful manufacturing tool, automating every step of the DFMA process from design to final delivery. StruxSoft doesn't just work with Revit, it transforms it. Jumpstart your designs at StruxSoftSolutions.com. Halleck Ltd. has a long history of innovation in cold form steel manufacturing and producing innovative precision roll forming technology for customers throughout the United States and the world. Check out their machine buyer's guide for off-site modular construction or fast build construction with light steel for framing. Go to their website, halleckltd.com. All right, a big thank you to all of our supporting members, as well as all the supporting members you see going across the ticker below on the screen. We can't do any or all of this without all of your support out there. So if you want to be part of what we're doing, feel free to reach out to us, DM us on LinkedIn, or however you like. All right, without further ado, why don't we get into the show? Let's bring Shawn in and see what he has going on. Shawn, good to see you, my friend.
Great to see you, Dave. Excited to be here. And I love the intro. I think we're definitely here today to make carbon visible.
So does that mean I'll be able to ask for it at the hardware store and buy it in a grocery bag?
If we're successful over the next, hour, we might be able to get there. Well, let's see what we can do.
Love it. Love it. All right, Shawn. So before we get into everything you're working on, we want to know everything about you from the moment you were born to this very moment in time. Do not leave out any of the good stuff from the hospital, or we're going to bring your entire team on from DuPont. And I'm sure it could get quite embarrassing on occasion, but you only have a minute and a half to do it. The floor is yours.
They've got some info for sure. So I am a native Michigander from the Detroit area. Kind of grew up in the auto industry, piano, bowling as a kid, all that good stuff. And in high school, I kind of got interested in chemistry. And that took me into chemical engineering in college. And that led to got a PhD in chemical engineering at University of Michigan. But along that line, became really interested in sustainability. I took an industrial ecology class that kind of opened my eyes to just the macro big sustainability problems in the world. And I thought, that's the kind of thing I want to work on. So that brought me to Dow Chemical, actually as a research engineer. But my interest in sustainability kind of helped me get a role in the corporate sustainability team. And that's where I learned how to do life cycle assessment and helped with setting sustainability goals. Eventually brought me to kind of where I'm at right now, which is leading first product stewardship and then overall sustainability for our building and construction business unit, which of course in DuPont now is DuPont Shelter Solutions. So just super passionate about these big problems and how we work together, how we collaborate to kind of get our arms around them.
Love it. So, Shawn, for those who are not familiar with DuPont Shelter Solutions, why don't you give us the quick version? What's the division's focus? How does it connect to the broader DuPont sustainability story?
For sure. So as DuPont, we are probably not your grandfather's DuPont. We're actually, not a chemical company. We like to call ourselves a premier multi-industrial, which means that we sell solutions and innovation into many different markets, things like water, healthcare, and in our case, construction. So the part of DuPont that I have the awesome, privilege of working in is called DuPont Shelter Solutions. It is our, of course, building and construction focused business. That's why we're here today. And it's really kind of two different halves. One half focus on the building envelope that we call DuPont Performance Building Solutions. So products that I'm sure you all are familiar with, like styrofoam, XPS insulation, Tyvek home wrap, great stuff, or froth pack, spray foam solutions. So all aimed at energy efficiency, right? Kind of really driving an energy efficient, high performing envelope, helping you get those really low ACH numbers. And then on the interior side, kind of the other half of the business is our Korean design business, where we're providing decorative surfaces solutions for things like your sinks, your countertops. And, the sustainability conversation is equally relevant on both sides. So it's kind of great to have both that exteriors and interior perspective in the work that we do.
Yeah, I mean, DuPont's into so much more than I think most people know, right? I think they're just originally thought of as a chemical company, but that is so far from what they really truly are throughout the whole organization, correct?
Absolutely. We've gone through many transformations. The last one was like 6 years ago. Actually, next month, we're going through another one where we're kind of separating off the electronics business, but again, staying really focused on these end markets, again, back to the healthcare, the construction, the water, EVs, that sort of thing. So what's kind of cool about that is from my perspective as the sustainability leader for the business, if I'm working with my peers, I'm kind of hearing what's going on in automotive and, these guys are talking about that thing. Well, we might see that around the corner in construction. So it's cool to have that vantage point as part of DuPont.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're just joining us, Shawn from DuPont is with us. Shawn, we have a slide deck presentation, a couple different slides that you're going to want to show, where you kind of laid out a strategy, behind a roadmap to look at how you achieve everything you guys are looking to achieve. So I definitely want to dive into that. So why don't I put that roadmap up on the screen and you can maybe walk us through a couple things. Sound good?
Yeah, sure thing. And maybe kind of set the stage as far as like what my role actually is. So again, I've got the awesome responsibility of leading sustainability for this Shelter Solutions business unit. And so that means that I'm responsible for really thinking about, how do we drive sustainability through the work that we do? How do we make sure it's integrated within our strategy? And, how do we set goals? How do we drive progress against those goals? That's a little bit what we're looking at here as far as the goals themselves at the DuPont level. So I think just from an overall DuPont level, we kind of break our sustainability mission into 3 different places. You've got a big innovation focus there on the left side of the screen. And then in the middle, you kind of have a really big protect the planet focus with a number of goals there, right? Ranging from climate to water to safer chemicals. And then, of course, we have a people focused goal or pillar that kind of deals with both our people internally as well as making an impact in our communities. So this is kind of the overall picture for DuPont, but what we really want to focus today again is that bag of low carbon that you want to try to get when you go to the hardware store. So our acting on climate goal, and there's some details there. The thing that I wanted to share is that we've been over the last 6 years progressively increasing our climate ambition. So the numbers that you see on the screen, yes, we had, if folks are familiar with climate emissions reporting, you kind of break it down into different scopes, and we set different targets for those different scopes. But we've already smashed through those. And so these were 2030 goals that we already met like last year or part of it the year before. And so the question is, well, what do you do next? And the answer to that is on the next slide, if we can go to that one, Dave. Because we made some really good progress. Beyond that, you say, well, if we're making such good progress, where do we take it next? And naturally, for us last year, it was the decision to really commit to making or driving towards a net zero emissions profile by 2050. And this is in line with the science-based targets, all those sorts of things. So basically, we've had some really good progress over the last 6 years, and I think we'll talk about what that looks like from some of the products and embodied carbon. But as a company, we're driving to net zero. We know this is the right answer. I think everybody understands, when it comes to the science of climate change, you got to get to net zero by 2050 at the latest to really avoid those worst impacts and some of the things that we're even already seeing today. So we're super excited about this, about really building on the progress that we've made thus far.
I love it. So, goals, right? How do the goals come to life within DuPont? And then how do you actually measure progress across, such a large organization from DuPont?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that is where, like this goal that we're looking at specifically is for the company at its whole, but we kind of look at in our individual businesses, what's most relevant to the customers. So in our case, we know that climate change, embodied carbon is a big thing. Our customers are asking for EPDs. They're looking for help decarbonizing their own builds or being prepared for when that becomes an even bigger issue, right? So we've got our specific focus on carbon and decarbonization. And in terms of measuring progress, right, we kind of set our own numbers that we wanted to achieve. And I guess that's the part that I'd share is we set a 2030 goal aimed at reducing our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 75%. From 2019. So 10 years or so to get there. And already last year, we were at an awesome number of 93%. So we're trying to get to 75. We smashed it, got to 93. And so really we're looking at now, like, so, what is next? How do we take it forward and kind of advance that overall net zero mission?
Right.
So just
sure.
great progress.
So, I mean, these are big numbers, right? They're not tiny numbers, 93% reduction in scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions, and 94% reduction in embodied carbon, right? For some of your products like styrofoam, XPS installation, expanded EPD portfolio for 3 major products. So I guess the question for me would be, that's a huge lift, especially for materials that were once seen as high carbon. Like people wouldn't touch them in the high carbon world that really truly understand it. Walk us through what went into achieving, that reduction while maintaining the product's performance. Because I think that's the big question always, right? Okay, great. They reduced the carbon. What changed?
Yeah, for sure. And that's where some of our life cycle assessment expertise kind of comes in. Because you do that, you look at any product carbon profile and, the carbon footprint, and you try to understand where the big hitters are. So the comment that you were just making, right? If you ask most folks, well, hey, what are the high carbon materials? You might think of concrete, you might think of steel, maybe more on the non-res side, right? A lot of folks would think that it's these foam plastics. But what we figured out, Dave, was that, we basically had a blowing agent problem. We had, blowing agent that had really high global warming potential, just, very, very large greenhouse gas, if you will. And so we needed to innovate. We needed to that blowing agent plays a key role in delivering the performance, the thermal insulation properties of something like styrofoam. But we had kind of a massive program in place over a number of years that found the solution that worked. And so that's essentially what we've done is decarbonize the embodied carbon with product innovation really aimed at the blowing agent that's allowed us to reduce that embodied carbon of styrofoam by 94%. So we've done something similar on our spray foam line for the froth pack. And so I think it's just a good sort of reminder that innovation continues to happen in industry. Like, we know where the big hot spots are, we're working on them. And when you look at something like the progress we made on styrofoam on the XPS line, right, that's just showing that we can do it. So that's one step. By no means are we done. We're not done until we get everything to net zero, but a first sign of progress.
So with that, are you also expanding your transparency, with third-party EPDs and renewable-based materials like Tyvek, right? Or how are customers responding to these changes, I guess, is the big question, right?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe we can bring up let's get into that through our report. So let's just highlight here. Yeah, so one of the things that we're excited about, you kind of have the big corporate DuPont report. Well, because we know how important sustainability is to all you guys out there. We publish a specific sustainability report just for our construction customers and for the industry. And so this is the one that we came out with about a month ago. Super excited to get this out. This is our 4th version of that. You can definitely scan that QR code and it'll take you straight there. And I'll get to kind of the EPD thing that you're talking about there, Dave. But let's go to the next slide, because one of the things that I think is really important in that I imagine listeners are thinking about is, hey, DuPont, big company, great messaging, and is it all just sort of lip service? How do you think about this? And especially this year, right, where we've had some really interesting external dynamics that are putting some sort of anti-sustainability pressure out there, right? When Tim, who leads our business, and I sit down and we think about the letter that we want to put in here, this isn't just, let's put a bunch of stuff together. We're pretty intentional about this. And so the message we wanted to deliver, when you look at our report, is that we're still doing this. We're still driving sustainability, despite all the headlines you hear out there. We know how important this is, to the planet, to our industry, to our customers, to our own employees who get super fired up to come to work every day to work on this stuff. So just wanted to highlight that, because no doubt with a lot of the headlines that have been out there this year, somebody can say, ooh, well, is this company still in? What are they doing? Are they pulling back? Clearly we're not pulling back. This is still important to us. And really, just even from a business perspective, we look at it as a long-term issue, right? So, climate change, is it going to blow with the wind of, sort of political changes? It is a scientific issue that's here for the long term, and we have to manage it as a business.
Yeah. And for those watching, I know it's kind of hard to read these reports when we're doing a live show. So there is a link right there, a QR code. So go ahead and pull out your camera if you want to read that sustainability report and download it. We're going to keep that link up here for a little bit and share it with the audience. So let's move on to the external landscape a little bit further, Shawn. I want to know what's happening out there. So let's address the elephant in the room. Federal priorities can shift. Imagine that, right? And sustainability headlines are noisy right now. You're not hearing a whole lot about it, based on what's happening in the world. You said climate action is still happening in the U.S. So what's the mood you're seeing amongst industry leaders, and why do you think sustainability remains a long game that goes beyond political cycles?
Yeah, so that's a question we've been obsessed with understanding this year, right? Because there's definitely a lot of noise being made out there. And we'll say that when it comes to, sort of what is happening, the home builder market, folks are familiar that 45L tax credit for builders is going away, right? 25C, 25D tax credits for homeowners to drive energy efficiency, renewable system, that's going away. On the commercial side, 179D is going away. And the overall really big sort of carbon tailwind that we had, which was the Inflation Reduction Act, that's going away too. So there have been some impacts of the tailwinds that we had, but what really struck me over the last month, we had a number of external conferences. It's the fall time, just kind of catching up with folks. What was clear to me is that sort of while the federal actions kind of dominate the headlines, there are so many local actions that are moving things forward. There is a whole mayor's climate alliance of like 350 mayors that represent like 60 million Americans that are committed to driving climate action. And there's a U.S. Climate Alliance of governors that accounts for, I think, 24 states, 57% of the U.S. economy, something like that, still committed to driving action. So, while the national headlines might be one direction, we're still seeing it at the local direction. And this, one of the examples, I think we'll talk a little bit about kind of what matters, what doesn't matter. But one example of this was from some of our friends who are building homes in these areas. So let's take Thrive Home Builders in Colorado, for example. Gene Myers, Stephen Myers, these guys doing awesome work. They also are remaining committed to kind of their energy efficient vision, in a really difficult market. What they found is that their local municipality in Breckenridge, for example, has a climate action plan where the municipality is preferring low carbon builds and zero carbon builds. And so they've been able to sort of, get this business based on their approach to building, their approach to carbon. And, if that municipality didn't have a climate action plan, didn't prioritize it, right, that wouldn't have happened. So just one anecdotal example, but, for me, that was just one of the excellent ahas over the past couple of weeks, is that this momentum does continue as, the federal headwinds kind of blow.
Yeah, no, for sure. And hopefully the federal headwinds continue to blow in the right direction, and we get back to some of these topics as well on Capitol Hill. So with that said, let's talk about DuPont's, internal transformation. From a business perspective, you said carbon doesn't solve anyone's immediate problem, but it's still a risk that needs to be managed. So how does DuPont, operationalize that mindset internally? How do you get every business unit to take ownership of decarbonization when the ROI isn't always obvious in the short term? It's two questions. I'll leave it to you.
I love this question. Such a big one. So starting out, how do we drive decarbonization, right? As a business, as I think about, kind of my role again as sustainability leader for the business, it's somewhat trying to make happen the things that we want to do. So how do we do the sustainability things that we all want to do? Decarbonization takes effort, takes time, takes resources, and there's always going to be the ROI, like no matter what, right? Whether you are a DuPont, whether you are a builder, whomever, you're running a business. And so that's kind of where you start from. So then within that, you look at, well, how do we understand what the market drivers are and what can work today, what could work tomorrow? So say, okay, if somebody, one of your listeners said, well, hey, I want a zero carbon, this product or that product, we could probably do it. It might just take a lot of money right now, right? So we have to understand those levers and what's possible and kind of be ready when the market is ready to do that. So when does the market get ready? This is where it gets really interesting. And this was, again, a kind of a recent realization. So Dave, when you wake up in the morning, I'm sure you're thinking, well, hey, I gotta eat, I gotta work, I gotta go home, I gotta come sleep. You probably don't think, and I gotta get my negative carbon fix. Like that's not a fundamental need, right? So, you may be interested, I may be interested, right. But as far as like the overall market wanting to pay for carbon, it's not providing them comfort, it's not providing them durability, it's not providing them, home safety. So it's not really a thing that kind of comes through. So there might be some part of the market that is, but fundamentally, you're probably not gonna just go to the supermarket again and pay for a bag of low carbon. So how do we solve that? Well, as a business, the fun thing, like you mentioned, is on the risk side, and I guess that's fun depending on how you think about fun. But when you look at carbon, we see at DuPont, we see carbon clearly as a risk that needs to be managed from a business perspective. And with my sustainability hat on, then it's like, oh, well, cool. When we manage that, that's how we get to solve climate change. That's how we get to drive climate action. And so what that means is that we fully expect that there'll come a time when there is clear business pressure on reducing carbon emissions. And that maybe that is from some of the regulation that we see, for example, like what California is looking at right now on reducing embodied carbon emissions. Maybe that's a price on carbon that puts out there. Who knows how that comes to life? But we believe that based on where things are at, the action that needs to happen, that will manifest itself in business terms. So, okay, well then, what are we seeing? We're already seeing investors asking us about our carbon intensity, our carbon profile, right? Because think about it: if you're a pension fund, you want your investments to be around, decades later. So these fund managers don't want to have a carbon intensive asset on their books. And so, they're continuing to ask us questions. What are you doing to decarbonize? So again, sustainability hat on, awesome. That's some pressure that drives some action. But the other side, I think, is back to the regulatory piece. So if folks, I'm not sure how many folks might be tuning in from California, but certainly a lot of energy in California around carbon. And I was surprised at some of these recent events that even builders weren't as aware of what's going on with respect to embodied carbon specifically. So California is trying to reduce its embodied carbon of its buildings, of its new builds, 40% by 2035, I think it is. And that's a big chunk of reduction. So there's policy out there that basically says, if you're building a development over like 10,000 square feet, you must submit your embodied carbon numbers and you must reduce those over time. And then the same thing for product manufacturers, right? You need to submit your EPDs and it's expected to reduce those over time. So you're seeing some regulatory pressure. And I put all that together and say, while the customer pull through might not be there yet, the investor pressure is strong, the regulatory piece is increasing. And so we have to be ready. So, we can't just one day customer says, tomorrow they call us up and say, we need a zero embodied carbon Tyvek.
Right.
Actually, we've got a way to be working on that, but can't just flip a switch. So we have to be working now. And to your question about how do we actually manifest that? One of my roles, parts of my role is kind of activating the DNA, the sustainability DNA in our culture. And that has made our job of decarbonizing a little bit easier because we're working basically across our portfolio. Each one of our product managers who are responsible for their product, they're now tasked with understanding how to decarbonize their products, working with our technical team, working with our life cycle assessment folks, really building that list of levers that they could go pull when it's time. And of course, some of them we're already pulling because we know we want to continue to drive this down. And so as an organization, that's kind of how we're getting at it, is
Right.
you kind of set the expectation, you arm the capabilities of LCA, and you just watch folks go forward and do good things.
So, when we talk about all these different things, right, and we talk about, scenario analysis, transition planning, giving product managers ownership, all of these things will be critical, especially in a large organization, for change. So how is that change, really, in the teams that have to make these change working? Is it working? I mean, it's not, you can't do all this on your own.
Yeah, not even close. No, I kind of sit here and try to connect folks and have the good conversations. But no, even this morning I was on a call. It's just great to see what's come to life around really the people in the culture. Because, like you said, I could set these goals all day, but if they're not embracing it, doesn't matter. So I see meeting after meeting where our innovation teams are bringing ideas to say, oh, we could do this, we could do that. Where our product managers have just taken ownership of this and have even started to kind of build their own decarbonization pathway, if you will. So from a culture perspective, it really is happening, and it's just it's just awesome to see in many levels in terms of being ready for those customers that are going to be asking about this. But again, we see it as really a long-term strategic need that we're driving. And I think we're on the right path. So we've got, again, some great things to be proud of. Go back to the 94% scope 1 and 2 emissions reduction, the 93% embodied carbon reduction in styrofoam. And, that's not enough. We've got more things to come. So excited to see what our team puts together there.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, this brings me into like collaboration and how do teams actually collaborate, and why is collaboration so critical in making progress, not just internally in DuPont, but externally as well. Do you have any examples where you can share about working together and how that helped accelerate results faster than people going it alone?
Yeah, for sure. And I might, this is a big focus of our sustainability report even the last couple of years. If you saw that letter that we flashed up, there's a little video you can click on. You can listen to Tim and sort of, I have a conversation on how we're thinking about decarbonization. And one of the things we point out is how important supplier engagement is. Because again, if you look at where the decarbonization opportunity is, sure, we've continued to innovate within our own fence line. Where can we become more energy efficient? Where can we have process innovation that reduces direct emissions? But man, that huge opportunity is upstream with our suppliers. So that path to a net zero product doesn't happen without our suppliers who can provide a low embodied carbon raw material. And so we've had a lot of great conversations with those suppliers. And one of the examples that I think is really good to lift up of that collaboration actually comes from another business within DuPont. So it's from the Tyvek business itself. And there they had a lot of interest in lower embodied carbon Tyvek. in this case, in the medical packaging business. So they went out and did some great collaborative work with a supplier who could provide them a low embodied carbon raw material that they could then turn into Tyvek. And so, that's something that medical packaging, those customers have really been excited to see. And, if you're looking at wrapping your house in Tyvek and you want a low embodied carbon Tyvek, well, man, why couldn't we do the same thing there? So to get there is going to require that collaboration, certainly, to, again, bring that forward from the supplier side. But it's really the next big tranche of how we get at decarbonizing is that collaboration with suppliers. And it's just so key that we have those partnerships.
Yeah. How many, it's such a huge number, I'm sure, but how many products are you currently working on within the DuPont family trying to reduce the carbon? I mean, because you got thousands, tens of thousands, probably, right? So how do you manage that?
We do. And I couldn't give you a tally across the entire company, but what I can tell you is that across our entire, whatever we are, $1.6, $1.7 billion within Shelter, we're looking at all of our product lines, right? Like everything in there. We had some really good product line by product line conversations earlier this year. We've got another regroup kind of at the end of the year to check on where we're at. And it's activity across all of them. Some of it is active conversations with the supplier. Some of it is internal product innovation where our really smart people in the lab are doing some super cool things. Some of it is more of a, kind of a paper exercise just to start with the LCA because we've got those capabilities that we've built and understand, what matters. But no matter what, across the entire portfolio, we are actually working on decarbonization and understanding, again, what could we do and when could we do those things such that it drives business and gets our customers what they need.
So, Shawn, I got to ask this, right? You got a PhD in chemical engineering, a background in sustainability. You somehow still find time to do CrossFit, right? Piano, metal guitar. You got all these things going on in your professional life and your personal life. I'm what you call an overachiever compared to myself, right?
No.
I know. But, really, what keeps you personally motivated to keep pushing for decarbonization? Even when the challenge, it's got to feel massive for you.
It's massive for all of us, right? And I think it starts, any of the folks in the building that I talk to that want to work on this stuff, they just want to make change where they see a huge problem out there. And, take it from, the storms that we see, the flooding, the heat waves, the wildfire. I mean, in Michigan here in the summer, like we never used to have to think about wildfire smoke. And now it's a regular occurrence where folks have to figure out like, hey, can I let my kids go outside and play today? As a CrossFitter, selfishly, I'm like, can I go run, do the workout outside today? I don't know. But that it's just recognizing that there's a huge problem out there. But man, we can be part of the change and we have to be part of the change. Like that's the part that I find so inspiring that I know a lot of our colleagues do, because especially as DuPont, like we can drive a change at scale, right? When we talk about decarbonizing our own overall business, 1 and 2 emissions by 94%, it's a huge number. So it has impact. And the question kind of back to the collaboration side is just how do we amplify that impact, that ambition across the industry? Because again, we know that the change is needed and we're just super amped up to continue to be part of that solution.
So if you had anything like to share with builders, manufacturers, policymakers watching today, what would you say is the single biggest thing we all need to do differently to keep moving forward towards a net zero future?
That's a great question. There's so many things that we could do, but one of the things that we've been just really focused on is just become aware, just know about carbon. Become fluent in carbon. So we talk about, everybody knows dollars and cents, right? So, what's your total cost of your materials going to a job site, right? You can add all that stuff up. Well, as carbon has to become a metric, again, that we think about, that we're managing, that's like a new language in some sense. So, just becoming carbon fluent, knowing that this thing even exists, knowing that there is an operational carbon, there is an embodied carbon together, they make up whole life carbon. I think becoming carbon fluent is really, really important. Or if you're in a position to kind of make decisions that drive that. On the other hand, though, I mean, if you are building, above code, if you are framing a zero energy ready house or something like that, know that you're contributing to that embodied that operational carbon reduction that needs to happen. You're playing a big role there. If you are a homeowner or a home buyer, one of the interesting things is this whole green appraisal side. You can ask for a green appraisal, and what that means is that if you've got energy efficiency within your home, you can actually get appraised for a little bit more. We're seeing some of these builders, you've got your Meritages, Beezers out there who are talking about getting like 3-4% higher appraisal value just because of the energy efficiency. So, that applies to any homeowner.
Right.
And then if you're a home buyer, the last thing is, again, back to knowing about carbon. Like Dave, the next home that you buy, you could say, hey, is this a zero embodied carbon house? And there are builders who are building to that, who are using carbon offsets to actually help get there. So just overall, just know that this is going on, that there are opportunities to ask questions and kind of learn more about it. And I think through that collective conversation, it's really how we raise the visibility, raise the awareness to keep driving forward and decarbonize like we need to.
And they have somebody like yourself. I mean, and if you're watching this, Shawn is the same off camera as he is on camera. You're a lot like me. Like what you get is what you get. You're passionate, you love it, and I think it really comes through on the show. And I think that's what we need. Data science and chemists and all this stuff are great, but it's really hard if they don't have a personality and they know how to relate, to the average people out here, right? That really don't understand it, trying to understand it. You put it into simple words. I love it. Is there anything, Shawn, that I skipped over, I missed? I mean, this is a whole lot of information in a short amount of time. Is there anything that I missed that you wanted to make sure we got across?
A lot of good stuff. Well, first I'd say that, I just have the honor of representing, 1,200 folks in our business and, thousands of people across DuPont. It is only channeling their energy that allows us to do this, because they're as fired up as I am for sure. So, that is super exciting. I think we touched on all the good things that were going on. The one thing that I might amplify, I know we talk about the EPDs and embodied carbon. And I know you had our buddy Chris Magwood on here a couple of times. We recently did a great presentation with Chris. We're taking the same roadshow to the ResNet conference next year on embodied carbon. And we're going to see the standard that he's working on, right, ResNet 1550, continue to unfold. So again, the carbon's going to become real. You're going to have to worry about that. As that happens, just know that there are manufacturers out there like DuPont who really understand that stuff, who can help you walk you through it. And when it gets down to the nitty gritty of like, does this carbon thing matter? Does that carbon thing matter? We've got LCA folks on staff that we've trained up, and we're happy to help advise on that whole carbon conversation. And I'll just say that is maybe kind of a thing to leave with, that the journey never stops. The journey is continuing. And I say that because 2 years ago, we didn't have LCA folks in our business. We had them at the company level, and great support from us, but we realized, man, the topic of carbon in buildings is so specific. You've got product category rules, you've got all these different considerations. So we kind of put the feelers out, said, hey, would anybody be interested in developing a little bit of LCA expertise? And we had three folks raise their hands super quickly on our technical organization. So it's just, for me, we're super excited to be able to have that capability now. When we look at the innovations that we're doing, again, across our product line, they're able to help advise us and really know, again, what matters and what levers we can pull. And it's just that continued progress where I think we're all getting better and smarter as far as how to drive this action forward. And again, kind of related to like, how do we do the things that we want to do in the market? It takes a lot of smart people, and just excited that we've got so many that are part of that.
Yeah, and we're going to go to a couple questions here in just a second. But if you're just jumping into this, we are putting the sustainability report on the screen. There is a QR code there, and then there's a web link below. I think it's important, for those that are interested to have access to these things, because you can't really read it on the show. So DuPont was kind enough to put together a QR code for us and put the report out there for you, so everybody and anybody can watch it. All right, we got a couple comments, Shawn. So let's go to these here. There's the LinkedIn user unknown, but let's put it up on the screen here and see what they have to say. I think I'm going to just get to the question itself. Where does it say? And there's a long one in it, Shawn. You got this?
Yes, I'm going through. So do we standardize?
Yeah,
right?
do you standardize? Right.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great question, because our awesome researcher who led our recent Tyvek EPD. So a new Tyvek EPD came out earlier this year. His name's Eric Hupsch, awesome guy. He's located in Luxembourg, and so he led our North American EPD, kind of update there. But now he's leading our European EPD, and there's some refresh needed there. So Tyvek, we've got EPDs in both regions. The thing about EPDs is, of course, they are regional. There are, those guidelines, the standards that even the product category rules might vary a little bit different based on region. And what that means is the product category rule is like, specifically what assumptions should you make so that it's all consistent. So yes, that does vary a little bit by market, but as a whole, consistently, like we are driving forward with the same sort of life cycle thinking and the same skill set. And so it's just a matter of, what does Europe need? What does the US need? And so I think the answer to the question is like, we are not doing anything fundamentally different, because when you think about embodied carbon, and when you think about decarbonization, it's all the same sort of, robust technical thinking. The EPD just happens to be a way that you communicate that out to the market, and that does vary a little bit based on region.
Love it. Love it. It's funny. We were just talking about my trip over to London before the show, and I guess they are tuning in. Homatics has a question for you. It says, "Hi, Dave. Can the guest explain how he defines embodied carbon?"
I love it because there's so many nuances to this stuff, right? You guys know this. So embodied carbon, walk everybody back. Like the entire life cycle of the building is your whole life carbon. Right? From extracting raw materials, processing those raw materials, make a product, installing it in the construction phase, operating the building, and then you're doing some maintenance as well, right? And then at end of life, you're tearing the building down, and hopefully you're repurposing it, all those things. It's a full life cycle. Across each one of those things, you've got carbon emissions. And the operational carbon, of course, is the actual use phase where you're heating, cooling, lighting the building, carbon related to all of that. Everything else is embodied carbon. So embodied carbon is related to the product itself. And so, from making Tyvek home wrap, right, from everything upstream and the raw materials, our suppliers that provide it to us, and, the part that we do to turn, the raw material into Tyvek, all the way down to end of life, transportation in between, that's all considered embodied carbon. And of course, you have to manage both of them. Now, where it gets interesting is when you say, well, all right, how are we going to drive action in the market based on embodied carbon? What I just laid out is a whole lot of calculations, a whole lot of stuff, and there's just not data on the entire life cycle. So if you look at what, again, our buddy Chris Magwood has done in the 1550 standard, and what a lot of folks have just focused on is that upfront, what they call A1 through A3. If you're familiar with EPDs, you'll know that term, but it's basically that raw material extraction, up to making the product at the gate, basically. So up until the point where we've got Tyvek ready to roll at the gate, that's really where a lot of the embodied carbon focus has been, and where you see a lot of the decision making going these days. Again, on the Chris Magwood episode, Dave, I know you talked about the BEAM tool.
Yep.
We had Jacob Rakusin, who's working on the BEAM tool as part of our recent discussion, and that's one example where they're looking at that A1 through A3 piece as part of just how do you do embodied carbon calculations. So hopefully that's helpful.
Well, there's a follow-up question to it now that he hopes you can answer. And being that DuPont is a global organization, this is his question. Why reduce it when we talk about locking it up? Is it a two nations separated by a common language? Would like to hear the answer.
Reduce it when we talk about locking it up. Is that the idea of like carbon sequestration, or the idea that a building should be a material bank, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, I'll wait for an answer. We're probably in a 5-10 seconds delay. So let's see if he can put the answer in there. We got Randy LePan just saying hello. Love how sustainability is right at the heart for DuPont. Shawn, you rock. We need more of your enthusiasm. Super, super cool. So
appreciate your comment, Randy. But again, know that I am only like one person representing a whole army of folks that have the same passion. So it's just my honor to be able to do that.
Yeah. Hey, and look at this. I mean, we got through it in about 44 minutes, just about, Shawn. I'll give it a second, see if Homatics puts another comment up there to say what they want to say. If not, you can just go to the comments afterwards and answer it.
So the comment made me think of something, though. And this is really important. So if I say, Dave, what's better, a fossil-based product or a bio-based product?
I would think a fossil-based product, but I could be wrong.
Well, you gave the answer. It does feel like a trick question. And a lot of folks, sustainability, carbon, they're going to say bio-based, right? Let's make our Tyvek out of, I don't know, sugarcane or something. The part that you run into is just that's not always true. And you have to just think of how you're processing a fossil-based product and how you're processing a bio-based product.
Mm-hmm.
You could have like zero carbon energy processing a fossil-based carbon or fossil-based product with zero carbon energy, super low carbon footprint. You could have, go to the cornfield that's literally in my backyard, chop down the corn, process it, make some crazy product. And if you're using diesel power and really dirty electricity to do that, you could have a high carbon bio-based material. So this is just one of the things that we run into. Like LCA folks think about this stuff all the time. And it's just important, again, to go back to the LCA because bio-based can mean better in some cases. Fossil doesn't mean bad all the time because it really depends what kind of energy you're using to process the stuff. And for sure, as DuPont does things like look at renewable purchase power agreements, we bring more of that stuff to our sites. Our own operational emissions go down. Right. So it's always a fun thing when folks are talking about this. There is a bit of a decoupling between the carbon performance of a material and its identity in terms of where it came from. Bio-based gives you the potential because you're kind of taking carbon out of the air, but you really need to look at how you're processing it as well.
It's complicated. Good thing we have smart people like yourself. All right. So here I have a follow-up from Homatics, and then we're going to call a wrap to the show after this question. He said, "Hi, Dave. We value carbon in our material passports. We have business and sell side verification." And then he puts up, "The point is, if it's embodied, sequestered, so why reduce it? The question is operating at several levels. It's important to separate them out. The consumer becomes confused and disengaged."
Yeah, I think I got the question. And again, great question from Homatics. No, so when we're talking embodied carbon, we're not talking about like the carbon that's in this paper, right? Or the carbon that's in this bottle. We're talking about the emissions of carbon that happened in order to make that bottle, in order to make that plastic. So that's the upstream sort of stuff. I fully agree that if you are taking like the way that we should look at buildings, of course, and this gets back to circularity, and we've got to focus on circularity. All right, buildings shouldn't be a place where products kind of hang out for a little bit and then they're disposed of, right? To your point, if that carbon isn't going anywhere, that carbon's serving a useful purpose. And so we should really look to recover that carbon at the end of life and then use it again. And so again, to the Homatics question, completely agree. If we are using carbon to make a product and we're locking that carbon up in the product, that's what we want to do because you're preventing the carbon from going up and, you're doing some useful purpose with that carbon. So yeah, just wanted to make that clarification. We don't, the name of carbon that would be in here is yet another term from the LCA world that would be feedstock carbon. So that's totally different, but I think the way that the Homatics person was thinking is spot on.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. Well, I'm going to put the sustainability report up there again. All right, listen, Shawn, don't go anywhere. You guys stay right there. Yeah, you got to point the other direction. Anywho, listen, are you going to Greenbuild this year? You better be going to Greenbuild. We have discounts for you. We got free tickets for you. We have a 20 by 40 stage on the show floor, and it's going to be big. We got people coming from all over just to speak on that stage, and we hope you're there to join us as well. So there's another QR code. We're QR happy these days, I guess it is. So make sure you click on that QR code right there with your phone. Sign up. Come visit us in LA, November 4th through the 7th. This is all about the rebuild. That's why we're going. That's why we're bringing the modular market, the ADU market, the components market, the panelized market. They need to know what their options are because they got to rebuild and they got to rebuild fast and they got to rebuild a lot of stuff. And we want all of you to be part of that with us, right? So make sure you join us out there. Let me go back to my two guest mode there. Shawn, this has been an awesome conversation. I hope it was valuable for you, and it's great to get the DuPont story out there. So thank you very much.
Appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate the engagement. Definitely a lot of carbon things we need to be worrying about, but just love I'm sure the collective energy that echoes across the viewers because together we will drive that decarbonization that we need. So thank you all.
Well, it's going to take an army, and that's all of us, and not just here in the United States, but globally. So I suggest anybody watching this also connect with the home addicts there. Obviously, they know their stuff. They're asking one of the most brilliant doctor scientists on sustainability and decarbonization that I know of. So, hey, Shawn, don't go anywhere. I'll come back to you after the outro. But for the rest of you out there, it's Wednesday. You still got 2.5 days to get out there and keep building it better. I'm Dave Cooper. Thanks for watching. What an amazing show. Thank you to all of our sponsors for helping us to continue to bring all of these innovative conversations to all of you out there. Please visit them, see what they have to offer you. And as always, subscribe to the YouTube channel and ring that bell. It would mean the world to us. I'm Dave Cooper. Thanks for watching.